Hello everybody, Treno here. Today I'm going to be looking at some potential Danish vehicles that could be included in War Thunder. Now you might be forgiven for thinking there aren't any Danish vehicles to include, as Denmark seems to have mostly relied on foreign built equipment, usually from Sweden. While this is mostly correct, Denmark did dabble in producing its own armoured cars, as well as some other interesting vehicles, such as motorbikes armed with autocannons and even an armoured motorbike, a concept I've not ever seen tried out anywhere else. Unfortunately, the latter concept doesn't appear to have been successful, but does show Denmark was seriously looking at developing some forms of armoured vehicles. In addition, of the armoured cars brought from Sweden, one was used exclusively by Denmark and the other, while used by many different nations, was sold with many different types of armament, thus making Denmark one of only 4 nations to use it in this configuration, the others being neutral Ireland, Sweden and Germany. I believe these vehicles could be a way of allowing Denmark to be introduced into War Thunder, as well as introducing additional Swedish designed vehicles. Logically, these vehicles would be added to the Swedish tech tree, probably as low-level premiums. In fact, this has already happened with the Pansarbil M40 already in the Swedish tech tree. Originally developed as the Pansarbil M39 or Lynx for Denmark, but mostly used by Sweden due to Denmark's surrender, with new 20mm cannons and engines fitted to become the M40. So having looked at why Danish vehicles could be included, let's look at the Danish vehicles that did see service with Denmark and how they will fit into War Thunder. The first vehicle we're looking at is the FP1/FP2, which was a pair of vehicles involved in some rather interesting tests revolving around converting existing civilian trucks into armoured cars. The idea was that in times of war, civilian trucks could be obtained, whereupon armour plating and weapons could be fitted, turning them into useful armoured cars. 2 Ford AA truck chassis were used for this experiment, these being designated FP1 and FP2, this meaning Forsøgspanser, translated as experimental armour. Between the 2 vehicles there are 3 iterations tested, with the last of these being the final form as an armoured car with a turret mounted at the rear. As you can see from the pictures, these armoured cars' civilian background is still somewhat visible, and while the vehicles themselves seem to have worked well in their final form, the experiment was not continued as Denmark focused on buying purpose-built armoured cars from abroad. The FP1's armament consists of one 20mm Madsen cannon and 1 machine gun mounted in the turret. The 20mm has an armour penetration of around 16mm at 500 metres at a 60-degree angle, meaning it would need to be at fairly close range to damage thicker armoured vehicles. I've not been able to find an exact armour thickness for the armour plates, but it would have been very thin, providing little more than small arm of splinter protection. Likewise, speed and crew complement are also not reported, though likely slower than the AA truck's usual speed, likely around 40 km an hour or 25 miles per hour. I suspect crew complement to be around 3 to 4, a driver, gunner, commander and possibly a loader. You can definitely see a second person in the second iteration that was tested, so it's possible the last iteration also had this crew member. I do like this vehicle and believe it's a good showcase of some of the steps smaller nations took to secure armoured vehicles in the interwar period. However, I would place this vehicle at battle rating 1.0. The reason for this is that although it has a decent armament, its thin armour and low speed would be a severe handicap to this vehicle in the higher tiers. The next vehicle is the L185, or FP6 in Danish service, an armoured car produced by the AB Landsverk Company of Sweden. Only one was brought by Denmark in 1934, and due to engine issues, it was relegated to a training role by 1939. As with the FP1 and 2, it was also armed with a Madsen 20mm cannon, as well as 2 machine guns. Armour was thin at around 6mm, so much like the previous vehicles, only good for splinter and small arms protection. Top speed was supposed to be 80 km an hour or 50 miles per hour, but in practice was around 45 km an hour or 28 miles per hour. Crew complement was 4, consisting of a driver, commander, gunner and loader. Like with the previous vehicles, I believe this would be best suited at battle rating 1.0, mainly on account of its weak armour, though it does have an improved speed and decent gun to offset this. Next we have the L180, another Swedish vehicle produced by AB Landsverk. Only 2 of these were ordered by Denmark, who designated them FP7 and 8. These seem to have done well, but no more were ordered, with Denmark instead ordering 18 of the Pansarbil M39 Lynx, of which only 3 were delivered before the war. Armament was once again the 20mm Madsen cannon and 2 machine guns. Armour is a little bit improved, being around 5 to 9mm for the hull and 15mm for the turret, meaning it might have a chance to survive long range or low caliber shots. Max speed is 80km/h or 50 mph, making this a pretty speedy armoured car, perfect for recon and shoot and scoot situations. Crew complement is 5, consisting of 2 drivers, a commander, a gunner and loader. The second driver had a machine gun and was able to drive the vehicle from their position at the rear of the vehicle. Now, as mentioned before, this vehicle was used by many nations, but only 4 used it in the 20mm Madsen cannon configuration, these being Denmark, Sweden, Ireland and Germany. Therefore, while it could be implemented as a Danish vehicle, camos for these nations should also be included at the very least. I believe this vehicle could be added at either Battle Rating 1.0 or 1.3, as we now have an armoured car that is pretty fast and is able to take a little bit more damage. Overall, this seems the best of the vehicles we've seen so far. Lastly, I'd like to briefly look at a vehicle that could potentially be added and has a rather interesting concept in my opinion. This is the Nimbus motorbike with attached sidecar, mounting the 20mm Madsen cannon. Now this would be a very exposed target, obviously, as it has no armour and only 2 crew. Now the main problem with it is that in real life it couldn't fire on the move, at least not without causing damage to the bike itself. However, it must be remembered that vehicles in War Thunder work exactly as they are intended to work, i.e. unreliable tanks don't break down on the battlefield, planes like the ME-163 don't explode at random if jostled slightly, etc, etc. So if this was intended to be fired on the move, there's no reason it couldn't be implemented as such. If it wasn't intended to be fired on the move, it could still be implemented in a way that only stationary firing was possible. This would make it a rather useful ambush vehicle, using its small silhouette to conceal itself in bushes or similar cover, before unleashing a deadly barrage with the 20mm cannon. I could see this being added at around Battle Rating 1.3, and I believe it would make a rather interesting addition to the game, especially as I don't think any motorbikes have been added so far. So that's it for today's episode. I'd like to hear in the comments if there's any vehicles here you would like to see implemented. I personally would enjoy the Nimbus, as it would be a very unique vehicle for War Thunder and I think could be a lot of fun. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.